Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles. Thanks for listening. Steve Selin is the proprietor of South Hill Cidery in Ithaca, New York, where he farms apples organically and makes beautiful cider and music. Wendy and I stumbled upon South Hill Cider on a recent visit to the Fingerlakes region, and I was just so impressed by the quality of these ciders that I returned just a couple days later to get a chance to chat with that person who was responsible. And after a brief 5-minute conversation with Steve, I knew I wanted to interview him, and I think you'll see why. As I was getting to know Steve via this interview, I was delightfully surprised by the many unexpected and fascinating turns that this conversation took. It's always strange and special experience to find that someone far away living a different life is thinking about many of the same ideas that you're contemplating. One of the topics that we cover is how local is as important as organic when looking at the big picture of our ecological footprint. This idea has been vital to my current decision-making about my winery, Centralis. In 2021, we decided to move our winery production and the vineyards we source grapes from closer to our home in Los Angeles in order to reduce our carbon footprint and support local growers. The problem? Los Angeles County has no certified organic or biodynamic vineyards. And yet I've become convinced that the most direct way to make positive change happen in agriculture is to work in my local community with farms that need to change, not by driving for 3 or 4 hours to support someone who's already doing good work. Without relationships, how can we expect to have real conversations with each other? Without first listening, how can we expect to be heard? Yes, this presents some immediate compromises to my values, but I think it is the long-term way to have the greatest positive impact. At this point in American history, I think one of the most important things we can do is cultivate friendships with people with whom we disagree. And that definitely is playing into my thinking about winemaking this year. If you want to learn more about our decision-making priorities and the new vineyards and new fruits that Centralis will be working with in 2021, please subscribe to our email list at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. We'll be sending out emails and doing some blog posts about some really exciting new developments. As a consumer, one of the best things you can still do is buy organic foods and beverages at your local grocery store. But don't forget to drop some cash at your local farmers markets too. And now, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Steve Selin and South Hill Cider. Enjoy. Cool. Steve, thanks. Welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you doing this and having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
And can you tell us where you are and a little bit about what you're doing right now?
Right now I am in Ithaca, New York, and where I'm sitting right now was traditionally Goyonkono land. They were the inhabitants that lived here for hundreds or thousands of years until they were pushed out by our European ancestors. And this land was never ceded, officially it still should be their land. But right now where we are, it's in the county of Tompkins County in New York, and it's 4 miles south of downtown Ithaca. And Ithaca is at the south end of Cayuga Lake, which is one of the Finger Lakes.
And you just said Cayuga, which is the way I would think to pronounce it. Are you not from around there?
I grew up about 2.5 hours west of here.
I say that because I was just kind of joking because everyone when I was there was saying Cayuga, like without the, Cayuga.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, most of the people that I talk to around here call it Cayuga, possibly to differentiate it from Keuka, which there is a Keuka Lake, Keuka. That's
this is definitely people who are saying Cayuga, and they were talking about that lake. So anyway, a funny
Cayuga,
thing.
Cayuga.
Yeah. Oh, cool. And what is? It's funny. I just did a podcast about really going back to seeing the land through the perspective of the people whose land it was originally, who actually like lived uh, in a way that their culture of the land was invisible to the people that showed up, to the Europeans. And I'm
Right.
wondering, how much do you know about the way that, uh, I can't even remember the name of the people who were in that specific part of the world that you just said,
Yeah, Goyan Kono, and
the
they
Goyankona.
were.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean another word is Cayuga. That's the modern day name for them, but Goyan
ah,
Kono is what they called themselves.
yeah. How much are you aware of how they used that land and uh, you know techniques of agriculture, what they were doing and that kind of stuff?
Right. From what I've learned, it was pretty similar. That this whole region, like south of the Adirondacks. The Adirondacks is very different because it was harder to perform agriculture up there. But this agriculture was, um, it was a mix of hunter gatherer and agriculture. They did grow corn. They grew squash and beans together, and they would clear land in small plots and
Hmm.
sometimes used fire to clear it, which would then create open spaces where you could grow agricultural crops. And the soils were incredibly healthy because the forests that were there had these nutrient cycles with fungi. It's like just you know forest soils around here are some of the probably most imbalanced soils because that's sort of the climax ecosystem. So they would clear
Right.
forests in relatively small patches, enough to get light in to grow on them. I don't know how many years they would use those patches, and then they would travel somewhere else and do that again. Um, I have no idea how long they spent in one place. They spent long enough that they would actually build significant homes. It wasn't,
Right.
what they weren't nomadic or anything. They were fairly settled. So, you know, maybe
Yeah, and if you're
they.
settled up there, I mean, you have to deal with some pretty brutal extremes in weather at certain times of the year, I imagine.
Oh yeah, it gets well below freezing for 3 months of the year, 4 months of the year.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
winters can get pretty cold. You can have several feet of snow. Some of the temperatures can reach -20 Fahrenheit.
how,
Sometimes typical low is probably a little below 0 Fahrenheit.
and
Yeah, so winters can get cold.
yeah. Um, this is kind of an out there question, but how does it how do you personally reconcile knowing this history, knowing that you're living on land, assumingly you're farming and making cider and doing what you do on land that you purchased, but that this thing about, that this history of, like, how does that sit with you, and how do you think about that?
Wow, that's a deep question.
It
Yeah,
is, yeah.
it yeah, I mean the feelings run very deep. It's difficult because for one, we would try and support the people that live here as much as possible that are descendants of them. Most of them, if not all of them, have moved back. They actually got removed very forcibly for several times, and
Mm,
some have moved back from as far away as Oklahoma and
right.
other places farther south. And at times we've done fundraising for them. They've had several times where they're trying to raise money to keep the land that they have been given. At times, people have I don't know. I think it was donated to them originally, but it's not recognized as a reservation. It's really complicated because there are two factions of them that
Mm,
are not in agreement with each other, and some of them that are recognized that actually have reservation land don't
mm,
support some of the other people that have property that was traditionally their ancestors' land, but now they actually have to pay tax on it because it's not
Uh,
recognized as reservation. So recently there was a fundraiser to raise money to help pay the taxes so that it could actually keep this land. Um,
uh,
and so we've supported them by, we actually did an online concert during the pandemic last year. Raised quite a bit of money for them. It was one of the ways that we helped. We've donated money. We actually have a cider that we harvest wild apples from the what is now called the Fingerlakes National Forest, and there's thousands of wild apple trees up there that a bunch of cider producers actually use. There's plenty to go around. There's a lot of them up there. And so I've been donating money, proceeds from the ciders that use those apples to some of them. One is called Friends of Ganondagan. Um, there's I think it's a state historic site that has traditional longhouses, and they um, have it's a cultural center, and there's a Friends of Ganondagan, which is not part of the state, but it does more of the, I think, the cultural programming. They had a um, something where they were trying to keep native seeds going, and try and
mm,
keep that involved in the culture. And so we've so at this point it's been donating money to them, raising money for some of the other the traditional cayuga, and um, we've participated in some walks of solidarity. At times there have been protest walks that we've
mm.
participated in. Um, yeah,
Well,
right now those are the action. I'm always trying to think of, I'm pausing because I'm trying to think of more ways and better ways to support them, because I do, I feel that it's really important that we don't forget the past, and that we, help them as much as possible now.
Yeah, it sounds like almost a kind of reparations that you can take on personally to assist with. Is that a fair way to put that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is reparations for that kind of thing. I don't know if, but um, yeah, I mean, when I asked you, I really was not expecting you to have been so actively involved in taking action to do these kind of things. I was just more, asking a question of what your thoughts and feelings were about it. But that's really amazing to hear that there are these things that you can do and that you are doing. Um,
Yeah,
it,
I know it's a drop in the bucket, and I also want to acknowledge there's other cider makers around here who are also, um, kind of walking that path as well. And I really respect all the work that everybody's doing around here, um, in that
yeah,
direction.
that
Yeah, whether it's related to, I mean, cider, or anybody's daily life.
yeah, and it it sounds like well, it sounds like there's a lot of awareness of it. I mean, I if I'm not mistaken, if you head west through that part of New York, you get to a place where the road signs along the interstate are in the native language as well as in English. Is that correct? Does that ring a bell for you?
Yeah, there are a lot of place names that are, native names, and yeah, maybe on the southern tier. Um, yeah, I don't know if they're just place names, or if there are actually, there probably are on the reservations down in the southern tier, maybe road names or road signs in the native language. Yeah.
You don't get out much, is what you're saying?
I don't get out that way. Yeah. That's, I mean, yeah, not too much.
um, and I mean, just steering this to apples. Apples arrived with Europeans, if I'm not mistaken, right? Apples and pears, or were they here?
What we think of as apples and pears did, yeah. The
Okay,
genus that apples fall into is Malus,
you're right.
Malus, and there were native Malus species to North America,
Okay.
but they're very tiny crab apples. They're not even, I don't think, cherry
Uh,
size, and I personally don't know if I've ever seen one around here. I mean, I don't think I have.
it's
I
funny.
think they're more common farther south.
Okay. Some of the woods that I was hiking around, some of the forest edge that I was hiking around in up in that area, but a little further south than you, is I did see these little things that the leaves looked like apple trees, and everything about it, the sort of shape of it, the fact that it was sort of at the edge of things, but then the fruit were these little, they sort of were like a little spray of these tiny, like smaller than cherry like things that you're just talking about, and I'm now curious if that's what you're talking about. um
It could be. There are a lot of hawthorn around here
Maybe that's what it was. Okay,
that can resemble apples, and
I see.
and they can range from
Yeah,
the size of a pea to the size of a cherry.
right. And hawthorn are pretty complex to have one name hawthorn, right? There's like a bazillion different
Right.
little
Yeah, tons of different
tweaks of them,
species.
right?
Yeah.
Like sort of like
Yeah.
apples. If you're trying to break them down, just call all these things apples that are,
Yeah, for sure.
every seed is a different thing, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Every seed is unique.
well, and
Um,
so how did you get into? I mean, so you are, you're in charge at South Hill Cidery, right?
yeah. Yeah. It's my baby. Um,
It's your baby. How'd you get into
yeah.
that?
I got into it. Um, it was when I moved to Ithaca, to live here. I mean, I'd been in the area before, but when I moved back here around 2001, I met up with someone in particular who, I knew him through the music world first. He was an ethnomusicologist who had recorded um, some fiddle and banjo music from like North Carolina and Virginia border area in the late 1950s. His name was Peter Hoover, and I played
Mm,
traditional American old time music like banjo fiddle music.
mm.
And so I was listening to his recordings for years, and I was excited to meet him. So when I moved here, I I got to meet him because I was starting to play some gigs in some local wineries and bars and restaurants, and he was always there. He was always there requesting tunes and hanging out and serving us his what he called hooch, which was really fine brandy that he would make from not just apples but also cherries, pears, and quince.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, it
So,
was
and then
just great
distill it.
stuff. He would distill it. Yeah, he would make cider
Oh, nice.
and then age it for the winter and then distill it, and it was just
Mm.
great stuff. And I mean, I think really the primary reason he made cider was for the brandies and the distillates. I mean, he would certainly drink plenty of the cider um while it was still good, but he would
Right.
distill a lot of it. And so I got to know him through that, and then he invited me at one point to go on one of his, excursions. He would gather a dozen or so people, friends, musicians, dancers, and have these parties where you'd forage apples from wild trees, but also from abandoned trees that he located, including some like traditional Perry pears that someone planted that were like, incredible find.
Oh,
And then he
wow.
also planted his own orchard. And so I would just, for a few years tag along with them and help pick apples, and then we would all take them to a old press about 20 miles away that had a huge old rack and cloth press from 100 years ago that was run off like a single stroke engine that would just go like put put put, and like have these like 40-foot long leather belts running everything. It's kind of it was really cool. So we would
Did
all
it
just
have a
press our
hand
cider
crank?
together. What's that?
Sounds like it needed a hand crank to start it.
Oh yeah, probably. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure there was no electric starter on there. Yeah. Um, and so yeah, that's sort of what got me into making cider, and
That's
and just
amazing.
started doing that, and was blown away by the quality of it. It just tasted great, and so we made a
Yeah.
habit of it, and I started making several barrels a year.
Now
And
you
as a
were
musician, oh, go ahead.
you were blown away by the quality of the cider that you started making, or that you were making it with this mentor.
With yeah, right off the bat with him with
Okay.
the cider, that yeah, like because we would also gather our own apples, then just all throw them together in the press and then split it. And I know that the especially his apples that were coming out of his orchard were increasing the quality of everybody's cider because they would all get blended together. And he planted
Mm.
a lot of bittersweet apples and heirlooms and, just like all the right stuff. It's
Uh,
yeah. And so the quality on and that's also what made it so easy to make it part of our lifestyle, was that you could make really, really, really quality beverage at home because the fruit was amazing. Just like
right.
whether it's wine, I'm sure beer too, you need quality ingredients, but it's like really hard to make good beer at home,
Yeah.
because the level of sophistication of machinery that you need to do it is very different. Where with cider, you just need to collect great apples, which we're just surrounded by here, and press them and then put them in some carboys or barrels and ferment them, and don't neglect them, but just let them hang out for the winter and then maybe rack them once or twice, and then you can make phenomenal stuff. And so
Yeah.
we just started doing that and realized, like, wow, this is really great. So we would make it year after year. And this was just as a hobby, or even more as a lifestyle than a hobby, because
Yeah.
we would take cases of bottles everywhere and take kegs to parties and music
Mm.
gatherings, and so that got to be part of my lifestyle, not just drinking it, but like turning people onto it, giving people this beverage and having them light up and be like, what is this? This is great. It's like champagne, you know
uh,
and
that's
so
yep.
that's it was just a natural progression, that I did that for like 10 years before ever
Yeah.
thinking about doing it commercially.
Yep. That sounds very familiar with my journey with wine. I love
Mm.
that. And I mean, my experience with cider is really similar in New York with tasting stuff and just being like, this is like champagne. This is incredible. Like, I was blown away at the quality. I love that. So, what happened to Peter Hoover?
Peter Hoover passed away a few years ago. I don't know how old he was. He was in his 80s, I think.
And where do
Um,
you think his knowledge about the apples came from?
he knew a lot of stuff about a lot of things. He was that
Okay.
kind of person. Um, I, I,
Got it.
I think he went to Harvard at one point before he decided to just drop out and be a, kind of a ethnomusicologist as a lifestyle rather than a career. I think. I'm not sure what he was studying there, but he was just super smart. Photographic memory. I mean, literally, he
Right.
could remember days from 50 years ago and just
Wow.
recount the day. It was amazing. And yeah, I really don't know. I wish I would have asked him that. But I know he went to England,
Okay.
and visited. I think he went to Temperley's.
Okay.
Is maybe it's Burrow Hill. Um, and he definitely, really understood cider apples, from like the English cider tradition, and that's
Right.
that's definitely something that he understood like 20 years before anybody else in the Finger Lakes. He was just sort of like on his own doing this thing all by himself, and it was just really cool. And then yeah, and then he would give it away to everybody who'd show up to festivals with his whole cooler full of cider and different brandies, and just hand them out to people. He would have little cups with them, and in fact, he was the only person to this day that's allowed, like pretty much any restaurant around in the county that they would frequent. He was allowed to just bring his own homemade brandy and get glasses from the bar and just pour it for everybody. He was just that. He was a larger than life character,
I love
and
it.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like when those restaurants changed owners. Like someone
Right.
would have to approach them at some point and be like, actually, this guy, it's okay. Like
Right.
it's
This guy
okay.
gets a
Like
pass.
this guy gets a pass. He's the only one. Because
it's like
literally.
it's like he's like the band, he's got his own sort of
Hmm.
thing. He brings his own
Yeah,
entertainment.
and it wouldn't be like under the table. It would just be sitting right on the table, right in the middle of the table.
That's
People would
amazing.
come by, he'd pour them all brandy, and yeah,
Well, so there at South Hill, and you're just 4 miles outside of Ithaca. You are growing. You're certified organic, I believe, right?
I haven't done any certifications.
Okay, but
Everything
you
I've
are
done is by the book.
right.
Um, and
Just haven't done
so
the paperwork.
I just haven't done the paperwork. Yeah.
Got it.
And I,
So how do
oh, go
you
ahead.
go ahead? Sorry. No, no, no.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
was just saying, for the past couple of years, I've realized I really should do that because most of the work of doing things organically and or biodynamically is not the paperwork. Like
It's the work.
actually, like it's the work. Like the work is
Yeah.
99% of the work. So I should really just like buckle down at some point and just do the paperwork. But it's just so easy to put that stuff off. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just don't see a real need for it at this point.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, and you and I started talking when we met there about just how, obviously a lot of people have to source outside of your own cidery, especially if it's somebody like you, where obviously the foraged apples that you're using are just, growing naturally, so they're not being sprayed with anything. But if you're going to source, if you're going to expand what you're making, you're going to be reliant on orchards that might not share your own philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that led to our discussion about how important, in the scheme of, if we are trying to do good by our agricultural choices, how important local is, in that schemata, and it's just as important, if maybe not more so in certain cases, than any organic certification or organic approach to farming. Because I mean, you can just stop using chemicals and then use enormous amounts of carbon and other things to ship products, around the world and across the country and across the continent. Or you can use a small amount of, sort of conventional farming and be 5 minutes down the road and have basically a zero carbon footprint, other than that very local distribution footprint. And which is really worse, what's doing more harm to the world. Especially depending on what chemicals you're using, or if you're not using chemicals, you're just using a some sort of potassium, fertilizer, like a chemical fertilizer or something like that,
Right.
that
Yeah.
disqualifies you from being organic. It can be
Right.
a very minimal thing that disqualifies you from being organic, um,
Mm-hmm.
by the
Yeah. I mean,
book at least.
yeah. There's definitely that, and being as local as possible is also incredibly important. I mean, the carbon is one thing, but for me, I feel like having the relationships with the growers is
Mm,
incredibly important because I know how they take care of their orchards, and
right.
and I can actually, and I have influence on how they manage the orchards as well, which is also um, really important, both
Yeah, if
not
you
just for
don't
fruit
start that
quality, but
relationship, how will change ever happen? Like, if
right,
you don't
right,
start a friendship, that starts maybe as a commercial relationship, an exchange, a trade of time, your cash for apples or whatever, but then it becomes a friendship, and then it becomes like, hey, like, we can actually talk and discuss these things and move to a better way. And
mm-hmm,
yeah, without starting that relationship, which really starts with that, like, hey, I'm going to buy apples from somebody who is growing conventionally, you can't ever get to the end, or further down the road. You can't ever get further down the road. Not that there's an end. Yeah, I
mm-hmm,
love. That's a really great insight. Um,
yeah, yeah, and so that you were talking about the carbon footprint of being local, but those relationships have a very direct ecological consequence as well, because by being able to influence the way the orchards are managed that you're getting fruit from, you can, like I've had several impacts. One person, they were already pulling back on using herbicides and chemicals for economic reasons as much as anything, um, because they were selling their fruit more for processing. It didn't have to look perfect, and I just really like gave them the go ahead. I'm like, I do not care what any of this stuff looks like at all. I don't care how small it is. The smaller the better, really, for apples, as long as they're ripe and have flavor. Um, and so they were able to really, pull back on whole blocks
Oh,
from
wow.
using herbicides. And then another one, they only use organic chicken compost fertilizer on the block of cider apples that they grow for me. And I think we may even be getting wood chip mulch applied. I'm helping him figure out how to get a wood chip mulcher. It's one that I actually borrowed one from a nearby orchard and used it and was blown away. Just how I can mulch, 400 feet of trees with just like beautiful wood chips using this, mulcher that drives behind my tractor. And so, I'm working with him on getting this, which then allows more carbon to sink into the soil, which feeds the fungi, and it'll increase the health of the soil, and it'll also pull carbon out of the atmosphere at the same time. And it's like
Hmm.
it's a win-win, all around. And so that's something I'm really excited about working with some growers like that, especially because, right now I have about 7 acres of trees. There's about 2,000 trees in 7 acres. And, that's tiny in the big picture. I mean, for me, it's big because I didn't inherit an orchard or a farm. I had to convert it from a hayfield. And, but working with an orchard like that, I, the impacts I have, even if it's not totally organic, by starting to manage this soil organically with organic manure and wood chips that will decay and all that, it's having a good size impact.
On your 7 acres or the other one that you're talking about?
I'm already doing that, yeah, in my 7 acres. But then even these 10 acres I'm talking about that's grown for me,
Got it. Yeah.
that's now just using organic chicken manure, and hopefully by next year we'll be applying the wood chip mulch. Um, yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So, how do you grow apples organically?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, really, I mean, from a grower's perspective, I would just kind of revert back to like, well, I mean, philosophically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic a forest,
Hmm.
or at least trying to mimic like the edge of a forest, and so you want soils that are more, they're more driven by fungi than bacteria, like grassland
Hmm.
soils and cereals and even hay fields are more bacterial
Bacterial. Right.
in the microbes, and forests are more fungal. And so you're trying to get to more of a fungal driven soil. And so managing the soil is probably the biggest, like the biggest hurdle, but also has like some of the biggest impacts. And without using any herbicides, it's also very functional because you have to make sure that the trees get enough water and nutrients, and that's where the mulch comes in. Some people use cultivators to keep the weeds away, but we use mulch, and we just spread 4 inches, sometimes even up to 6 inches when we first plant trees of wood chip mulch on the
Hmm.
soil for like several feet around each tree. And then, having to maintain that, going in periodically and weeding it, and then planting ground covers that are less competitive, like slower growing grasses, so that when the grasses do finally take over, which once the trees are maybe 4 years old or so, you can let the grass take over. At least in our system, where we're using semi-dwarf trees rather than dwarfs. Um,
Right.
and so, I think if you talk to any organic apple grower, at least in the eastern US, the conversation's always going to start with the soil and ground cover management.
For the first
So,
4 or 5 years, something
yeah.
like that, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. And so that's really key. That takes a lot of energy, a lot of attention, um, and just commitment to it. And then, and then there's also, you have to get used to your location and figure out what are the real what are the pests that you really have to worry about, and then figure out how to control them. And that's when the conversation turns more towards, what materials are you putting on the trees,
Mm.
and then um, that can range from materials that are, combating various, whether they're insects or microbes, and then other materials that can actually encourage either other microbe diversity or kind of like boost the immune response of the tree. Like there's some
Right.
extracts of plants that will like boost the immune response in the trees themselves.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, we
Where,
could get
I
into
mean,
all the
what
details of.
resources? Yeah,
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead. What I was just gonna
Oh,
say, what
go ahead.
resources do you use to learn that, other than the land and observing? Are there reference books that you use
Um,
or have relied on?
Fortunately, I don't have to rely on books for that. I mean, I'm really fortunate that in the Finger Lakes here, I'm
Yeah.
surrounded by a community of orchardists, some of which planted organic orchards literally 5 miles south of here 20 years ago. And not, and on top of that, he was a Cornell researcher, and so
He did all
I'm
the
really
hard work.
fortunate. Yeah, I'm really
You can
fortunate. I
just
mean,
benefit from
yeah,
like,
and
so
so
what didn't work for you?
yeah,
Great. I won't do
yeah,
that.
but it's also incredibly complicated because he's 5 miles away, but I have a totally different system, and
Oh,
yes, but there's other orchardists around that are, you know have orchards similar age, similar management techniques. There's a great meeting of apple growers in Massachusetts that is hosted by Michael Phillips, who is
yeah,
yeah, holistic orchard guru. And
sure.
so
Yeah.
for years, I've been able to participate in that meeting, and the amount of accumulated knowledge in a circle like that is priceless.
It's like
There's
you just,
people that planted orchards 50 years ago there.
as much as it's a cider gathering, you probably want to stay as sober as possible to just download all the knowledge that you can while you're there. I imagine.
Yeah, totally. And that is kind of turning into somewhat of a cider gathering. When I started going, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago or something, there was some cider there, but
But
it
it
was
was more just
still,
apple,
yeah,
like eating apples.
right. Yeah, exactly. But over the
Mm.
past few years, a lot of either cider makers who have planted orchards are participating in that, and also some of the older guys there have actually started making cider
Right.
because they've got these killer organic orchards, and not all of
Ah,
the apples are, you know, great eating
right.
apples to sell. So, yeah, so it's
And
sort of, there is a little offshoot. Andy Brennan has actually started a couple meetings as like an offshoot from that, which are more cider focused, but with the same, kind of the same foundational intent, to like share knowledge with other growers
what
and producers.
what is that like? Is it? I mean, is it a typical conference setting like you would expect, or is there something unique about that? I'm just curious because I mean, everything that's happening here on the West Coast with wine seems to be very conferency, very
Mm-hmm.
like, you pay a fee, attendees pay a fee, exhibitors pay a
Mm-hmm.
fee, and then you have a conference. But these things somehow seem a little more like invite only, and then it's just a bunch of people in a big, like I imagine like a smoky lodge with lots of cider and apples and things like that. I probably
Mm-hmm.
totally romanticizing it, but
No,
what?
that you're not far off. Yeah, it is. It actually takes place in a tiny little cross country ski lodge in the
Oh my
Berkshires,
God, see?
and that the owner built himself. And
Mm,
and
okay.
and it's very small because the format is just a circle of
Oh
people
my,
sitting around, all participating in the same conversation. And
that's
so
amazing.
you can't do that in a group larger than 30 or 35 people. And
Wow.
so yeah, so that's it. And the owner cooks us breakfast in the morning and lunch, and and so we pay for the lodging and a couple meals, and that's really it. Yeah,
That's
it's
amazing.
it's pretty great.
Yeah, that's all right. Now I know what we need to do out here. Thank you for that. That's good inspiration. So, how long has South Hill Cidery been in operation then, as an active, licensed and
Right.
commercially
Yeah.
active
Yeah.
winery
So
cidery?
yeah, about 2013 is when we, I think, formed the LLC, and our first vintage was 2014. We got the
Okay.
license in 14, and I
And how's it
started making
going?
cider in 2002. So it took 12 years to do that. How's it going?
Okay.
It's going well. I mean, it all depends when you ask me. Like this year, it's just crazy. Like right now, this is 2021. It's midsummer, and the labor
Right.
shortage that you read about in all the newspapers is a real thing.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, like
So for picking apples for all the work in the orchard, l- it's
yeah,
difficult.
we haven't hit
There are
harvest
challenges.
yet. But I guess what I'm talking about is the tasting room. Like we have a tasting room
Ah,
that's
gotcha.
attached to our
Oh, right.
production space,
That labor
and that's
shortage, right.
yeah, and so that's where most of the employees actually work. We have 3 employees that work in production, and then we'll hire some help for harvest. Um, but yeah, it's pretty much three of us um, making the cider and um, maintaining the orchards. I mean, 4, I guess, total. But then out front there's maybe 10 or so people, and that's where we're
Oh
really
wow.
feeling the crunch there. Um,
Oh wow. Is it
but
I'm do you rely on the colleges, Ithaca and Cornell, for a lot of that
we
labor
always have a
force?
couple. Yeah, it seems like we always have a couple students.
And they really haven't
They're always
been
great.
around for the last year, I'm guessing.
Right, right.
So you're
That's
just
true.
yeah,
Yeah, a
you're
lot of them
out a
will be
big
coming
percentage
back.
of a
Yeah.
significant percentage of your workforce is just gone. That's
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But
What
otherwise, yeah, it's going great. I mean, our like the orchards are the orchards that we planted here, and the 10 acres of the cider apples are both doing great. I mean, they're increasing in production, doing great. Our orchard this year, we're dealing with fire blight, which is one of the bacterial um, problems that crosses the whole country.
right.
But in spite of that, we have the best crop. Yeah, the best crop that we've ever had this year.
Oh wow.
Um, that's yeah, really exciting.
So
Yeah,
did
and
the
it's
trees go in that time in 2013, or did they go in when did you get that land?
they went in mostly in 2015. I guess that's when like
15.
the first half went, and then we planted like a few hundred a year each year after that.
Okay.
Um,
Got it.
yeah, yeah, but it's
So
great.
what
We actually just built the cidery a couple years ago, the actual production space. Um, we were 2 years ago to this day. We were probably working on the interior of it. Before that, I would just rent space to make cider. Um,
gotcha. Did
yeah,
you
so
were you working other jobs, or was this your full-time thing?
yeah, I was working another job. At that point, I was both a musician and a luthier, and so I was basically performing oil changes on violin family instruments. If you're someone who plays your
Is that what a
instrument a
luthier
lot,
is?
a luthier is someone who builds musical wood instruments. Usually, it
Okay.
comes from lute, which is like a
Right.
very early string instrument. But anybody who builds or works on violin family instruments or guitars are called luthiers.
Got it. Okay. I love that. Do you know the book The Name of the Wind?
No.
Oh, it sounds like a very Patrick Rothfuss kind of existence up there where you are. That's why I ask. It's I, it's a really great sort of sci-fi, not sci-fi, fantasy book. It's hard. It's sort of a world unto itself. It's It's in a lot of like top 10 fantasy books of all time. Like there's Lord of the Rings, of course, and things like that.
Oh,
And then
uh-huh.
anyway, the main character is a sort of legendary lute player, at least by his own description. So
Oh, nice. I'll check it
yeah,
out.
yeah, it's. I think you might really like it. It's fun. Do you? I mean, what are the things that you would suggest are are the keys to success at doing what you're doing now with the
Wow.
cidery?
Yeah. That's a good question. I guess I would say just keeping keeping focused on a vision, of like why are you doing what you are doing? What really what is driving you to, grow apples and make cider, um
Mm.
and keeping true to that. And if that will, you know obstacles come up, like you deal with a tank of cider that just doesn't do what you think it's going to do, or an orchard that has a pest that is, really depressing, or when you run into hurdles of one kind or another, just, going back to that and being like, okay, why am I doing this? Oh yeah, okay. um
Mm.
to renew
Can you put
inspiration.
that can you put that why into words?
um that is a really good question. Yeah, it goes, yeah, I mean for me, I guess I would probably end up talking for a whole day about it, because one statement would lead to another. Like what comes to mind is just part of, like how, not even how I ended up doing this, but you look back at your life at times and you see certain points where um you feel like you really knew what you wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like when, you know, to to make a caricature of it, like, you ask a little kid, like, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to be a fireman. Um,
Right.
but there was a time when I remember, I had probably just, I don't know, I was like somewhere at the end of high school. Everybody's trying to ask you what you want to do with your life. And I decided I wanted to be an organic farmer. I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't even know any organic farmers, you know, but I, at that point, like I was already, that was in
Where
the,
did that come from? That's amazing.
I think it came from, that was like when I was finishing up high school, that's when global warming was really like,
Mm.
people were talking about it hard. It was like the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was
Well,
this
they.
like scenario that was like, this might happen. It wasn't happening yet on like a scale where it was really affecting economies, or, whole
And
regions' economies on like a global
what
scale, but it was definitely happening in some places.
what was the connection then from that to organic farming?
Uh, because modern agriculture degrades the environment so badly.
How
And
are you
I don't,
aware of this at that age?
um, I don't know. I mean, it's funny. My wife and I, we actually went to high school together. We weren't together in high school. We never dated or anything till years afterwards, but we were both voted most liberal, at the end of the yearbook, when everybody has, oh, flaming liberals. That's what it was. Everybody votes for like one boy and one girl as like the flaming, and we were both voted the flaming liberals, and like there was an environmental club at school. Yeah, I was just always interested in, I spent a lot of time outside, I
Okay.
was in, yeah, I was in a group that we went camping every month of the year except December, because I think that was just too busy for our parents to deal with. And so we'd be camping out summer, spring, winter, year round. I mean, winters, so I feel like I got I had a connection to the natural world just from spending that much time outside. And some of my family, some of my extended family were really, really in tune with ecology and just living close to the land and stuff. So I think growing up, I just had, you know, some experience that I inherited from my family that they were, I mean, some of
It's
them were
really
like old hippies,
okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna
yeah.
say it sounds like you had some good influences. I mean, some strong influences, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that you've used the word ecology in some really interesting ways multiple times already while we've been talking is I think is fantastic. I think this word is like something that is in vogue in a way, like that is coming into the consciousness of everybody right now, and you are using it well. Where does your use of ecology come from? What do you when you use that? Where is that coming from? What are your thoughts about that?
Um, yeah, I mean, ecology, I think even the definition of it is like, the structure and function of things, of the environment, you know,
Yeah,
of organisms. Um, and I think I just
like
always,
relationships to each other,
yeah,
to all
relationships to
things.
each other. Yeah. And how they're structured and how they work together. And that's just how I look at everything. And yeah, I mean that I have I I do have a graduate degree in forest ecology. So,
Oh well, there you go.
yeah, I mean that's, part of it. But that also going back to the original, question about why I do it, and I was going back to that time when I was like 18 and wanted to be an organic farmer, but then I got sidetracked.
Right.
Various things happened in my life where I just felt like I had to do something else, and I did something else for a while, and then I ended up in school, um, studying various things, natural resources and forest biology and forest ecology. And at every step along the way, I was trying to figure out, how do I work in this world, but like with my hands in the dirt, you know,
Mm.
like that's really what I want to be doing. And that's why now looking back at it, I realized like, oh, back when I was 18, I knew I wanted to like deal with ecology, but have my hands in the dirt. And, 20 years later, I am an organic farmer and I can have my hands in the dirt,
Of
but I'm
trees.
also, yeah, of trees. And I'm also dealing with ecology, because it's not just the ecology of the orchard, but, like the microbes themselves in the cider is also, there's ecology there. It's like very complex
Mm.
ecology. And
Yeah, and
so,
it's equally fungal, right?
mm-hmm.
I yeah, that's fantastic. It's funny. I don't know if you know Mimi Castile, but she started out in forestry, and then her family was in wine, and it seems like there's some really interesting parallels there to the forest, and then how we end up in or that might lead us through these fermented beverages somehow, that come from the forest edge in a way. I, I- I've been reading a lot about agroforestry. Do you see yourself as practicing agroforestry? I mean, do apple trees count
No,
as agroforestry?
they could. They could, but I feel like, what I'm doing, even though it is a polyculture of, all kinds of, native wildflowers slash weeds, and we even, the way we mow, we leave strips that are totally uncut for months so that they flower and can feed pollinators and,
Right.
bring up more nutrients from deeper in the soil and stuff. Um, but it's not, I mean, agroforestry incorporates animals usually in a way that's a lot more direct um,
Mm.
and functional in the system. Um, that that's always been one of my long term goals, is to have a block of trees that is traditional, agroforestry, whatever that is, but you
Where you
incorporate
have some
much
like
larger trees and
you have like some
animals.
ruminants underneath,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some fowl or something like that running around, some
Yeah.
sheep and some chickens and that kind
Yeah,
of
for
thing.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've tried, like, we've had sheep, we've put them in the orchard, we've had pigs, we've had them out here, but getting everything in line, it's just any farming operation is, when you're trying to do a couple different things, it's all about having those gears aligned just right. You've got the
Mm,
trees and you've got the animals, and you can integrate them, but they both have to be just, kind of on the right trajectory and at the right point. And it's the same with the animals. And we haven't hit that yet. Um,
mm,
some of the trees are getting old enough now that it's time to do it again, because
mm.
originally the trees were only a couple years, like 1 or 2 years old, and the animals were just way too destructive. Um,
Right. Right.
but at this point, some of the trees are 5, 6 inches in diameter, and they could withstand some pushing and rubbing and
All
nibbling,
right.
stuff like that. Yeah.
It sounds almost sexual, pushing and rubbing and nibbling.
Yeah.
Um,
All
well,
is, I guess.
well, reproductive at the very least. Um, uh, well, how can people find out more about you and your cider and South Hill Cidery? Like, where should they go, and how can they get
Yeah,
your
I'd
cider
say,
and
I
taste
mean,
taste all of this?
Google it. We're on Instagram. You can find us that way. On the web, just look up South Hill Cider. We do a lot of direct shipping. A lot of small producers these days. It's great how easy it is to get quality
Yeah,
stuff directly from them.
yeah,
Um, and so yeah, we ship a lot to California. There's 40 states we ship to.
right.
Yeah, and I'd say, scope it out. We have a blog on our website that we update every now and then. Like, every day, I swear, for the past 2 months, I keep thinking, like, I should really write something. I should really post something, but I've been too busy. So I promise, at certain times of the year, stuff shows up fairly regularly, and other times it doesn't. But yeah, just check it out on there,
So
and it's very small. Like, if
it's
you're interested in this, just send me an email and I'll get back to you. Like, it's
right.
pretty small little niche world.
Southhillcider.com,
Mm-hmm.
southhillcider.com, and at South Hill Cider for your Instagram handle.
Yeah.
Um, great. Any closing remarks, parting shots, anything people should know about what you're doing or about your ciders? We haven't really even talked about the actual ciders,
Right.
just all
Right.
the
Yeah.
things that are around them. Tell us
Um.
a little bit. Just give us a little tease of some of the ciders that you make that are delicious.
Yeah.
I was
Sure.
part of my experience with tasting your ciders is why I wanted to talk to you as well, is because they were so wonderful. So please, I will tell us about them.
Yeah. Thanks. I would say, for everybody, they probably heard it before, but cider is just wine made out of apples.
Yep.
That's what we make, and our ciders range from bone dry and still to sparkling, off dry, semi dry, and we just really are are trying to help the fruit itself express itself. And so some varieties want to be a still cider, some varieties want to be a sparkling cider, and some can go both ways. um, and so that's a lot of what we're doing, is bottling ciders that you can see what varieties are in them, and you can learn exactly how they were made. And so yeah, it's just like grapes, but they happen to be apples. Some are very tannic and low acid, some are have tons of acid and express themselves differently. So yeah, um I mean, there's at least a dozen different ciders probably available on our website, and we usually try and describe what's in them and how they were made, and also what to eat with them. It's incredibly important because
Ooh.
ciders go really great with so many different kinds of food. Um,
Mm.
yeah, because
Any good suggestions to send us off with?
yeah, it's really great. A lot of ciders go incredibly well with some curries, like
Oh,
spicy foods,
yeah,
especially even if
sure.
they're, really hot, spicy curries,
Yeah, yeah, of
can be
course.
really phenomenal with. And also, I mean, it's cliche to talk about cheese because like cheese and wine is such a kind of a cliche thing. But honestly, so many cheeses are even better with cider
Yeah,
for one reason or another.
yep,
I would definitely, if you like cheese, get a handful of dry ciders
yep.
and try them with the cheeses because they are, just phenomenal with tons of
Yeah,
different
and a
cheese.
really good mustard. I would also add in that as well. Like I don't know what it is, but something like if you, yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've made a whole meal out of just like a good cheese, good mustard, and a good cider.
Oh, nice. Also,
Yeah.
pork. I mean, pork is
Oh
like,
yeah,
you know, any way that you cook pork,
that's true.
try it with some cider. And if and if you have
Yeah,
any ciders kicking around that you're not finishing, braise pork in that
with
cider.
it. Oh,
It's just it's yeah,
such a
it's
good
always
idea.
a
Yeah.
no brainer.
I mean, what I love about cider is you can just pop a bottle with lunch. Like it's a great lunch drink. Lower alcohol, go pairs well with like a sandwich and and
Yep.
sort of feels just like the right amount of everything if you do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Half a glass of cider with lunch, and it makes
Oh,
your
I
food
was
so
thinking,
much better.
okay,
I mean,
good. I
you
was
can have a
thinking
full
half a
glass,
bottle, but hey.
half a bottle, but no, I'm saying like literally like if you have a half a glass of cider with lunch, like it makes your lunch so much better, but it
Yeah,
does not like you don't feel like you were drinking anything, in terms of
right.
alcohol, which
Yep.
maybe you do want to get half lit, in the
It
middle of the
depends
day.
on what you're
So
doing after lunch.
drink a
Yeah.
whole bottle with lunch then, you know. But yeah, yes, a little bit of cider with lunch is great. We do that. I don't know, almost every day here.
Yeah, that's
Goes
fantastic.
great with
Well, like,
pastrami. I guarantee that. We just did
ah,
pastrami sandwiches and um, had cider
yeah,
with the
so
SA.
many things.
Yeah,
I mean,
mimolette actually. Mimolette is it's a French cheese, really hard rind, um,
yeah,
slightly funky. Take mimolette. This is something that Rachel, our chef, and like she's a total cheese pro, blew all our minds yesterday with.
okay.
She saved all the rinds for the past like several months and just
Oh
boiled
man,
it down for hours and used that as a ramen broth
wait,
and
mimolette boiled in
in
cider or
water.
boil
No,
in
in water.
water? Okay,
Just in
okay,
water.
okay.
Just boiled that in water for hours. And that was the entire broth. There was nothing else added to it.
Water and mimolette rinds.
Water and mimolette rinds. And then she finished it with some miso and sweet corn, um, some little tiny mushrooms. But that with a bittersweet, like sort of an off dry bittersweet cider, totally mind blowing. So, I mean, we have one. It's called String Theory. That's the bittersweet. Actually, that one's more semi dry bittersweet cider. But that with the mimolette broth is just unbelievable. So if you're really looking for something different and fun, there you go. That's the recipe.
Woo! Yes, that sounds incredible. That sounds Michelin star delicious.
It was great.
Um,
Yeah.
it sounds
I even
incredible.
took a picture of it. It was so good.
You're not one to take pictures of food on the regular?
No, no, not all the time.
Yeah,
Not
me
on the
either.
regular, but
It's not my thing either.
that one I had to.
Nice. I love that. Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's fantastic. Steve, thank you so much for all of this. This has been honestly like a really delightful conversation, just talking with you about things that I didn't even expect to talk about because I didn't know you. And it's just been great to get to know you. Thank you so much for this time. And I know you need to check a pump.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite and for swinging by. Let me know when you're coming again. I'd like to hang out and drink some cider and wine and have some food.
Definitely.